John Nelson Darby, and we're going to find out who he is in a minute, and Congregationalists all accepted the Protestant Reformation view of who the Antichrist was. So when we hold that position, and that's a position that we teach, we have a good foundation for that position. Since the devil could not destroy the Bible truth of end-time events, he attempted to weaken its significance through a perversion of the truth. So then where did this modern notion of the Antichrist come from? This Antichrist that I read about in Hal Lindsey's book in 1977. Where did it come from? Where do you think it came from? Satan. And then what we've been reading? All here this morning, we've been reading how Satan has tried to pervert the truth of God. So anything that is contrary to the Word of God has come from Satan. He's the source. Counter-Reformation defenses, and like I said, they spent 18 years trying to figure out a way to block the Reformation that pointed to the papacy as the Antichrist. They call the Council of Trent, principally in order to combat Luther's 95 Theses that he tacked onto the church door there in Wittenberg. The Council of Trent lasted 18 years. They brought Jesuit scholars, and these Jesuit scholars worked very hard to come up with a counter notion. There were two main things that came out of that Counter-Reformation. The first one is called preterism. Pre meaning before. Luis de Alcazar was a Jesuit priest who interpreted Revelations chapter 14 to 11 as the struggle between Christianity and Judaism until the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, this notion didn't catch on real well back then, and it hasn't caught on real well since then. It is a notion. You still can go buy books that people have written from this foundation, and they say various things such as the Antichrist was Antiochus Epiphanes. You know who he was? Yeah, he's one of the Seleucid kings who came in after Alexander's kingdom was split up into 4 groups. And Antiochus Epiphanes went into Rome, captured Rome, broke down the temple, and slaughtered a pig on the altar, and they said, oh, well, he's got to be Antichrist. Look at the terrible things he did. But he only lasted a few years, and he didn't do anything else that the prophecy says that the Antichrist would do. They also claim that some of the early Caesars, like Diocletian, who persecuted Christians unmercifully for 10 years, they claim that he was the Antichrist. But whatever the preterists come up with, it always throws the Antichrist way back there somewhere, which certainly takes the heat off the Catholic Church. Then there was the notion of futurism. Francisco Rivera was a Jesuit priest, and he interpreted the same section of Revelation, chapters 4 to 13, as being the struggle between Christianity and the Antichrist during a literal 3.5-year period in the future sometime. We don't know when it's going to happen, just sometime in the future. Well, this too took the heat off the Catholic Church, right? Catholic Church can't be guilty, because this is all going to happen sometime in the future, way on down somewhere. We don't know when. These are Rivera's views. He said that the first 3 chapters of Revelation dealt with ancient Rome and the time of the apostles. So when we read about the 7 churches, that is literally fulfilled at the time of the apostles and has no more application. Rivera taught that the Antichrist would be a single individual who, during a spectacular 3.5-year period, would be received by the Jews through a covenant promise, would rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, deny Christ, abolish Christianity, pretend to be God, and deceive the world. That's a whole lot to get accomplished in 3.5 years. But you know what? That's what Hal Lindsey said. That's the premise of his book, Late Great Planet Earth. It's the premise of John Hagee's books. I've got one, Sunrise or Sunset or something, over Jerusalem. Same thing. It's the premise of Jerry Falwell's theology. This is what they preach. Where did it come from?
Jesuit priest.
Why did he dream it up?
So the big officer protect his holy church.
Okay. Been successful, hasn't it? Rivera also said that Revelation has to be understood as a commentary on Matthew 24 and Luke 21. That's not it. He taught that the trumpets literally immediately followed the seals. Now, as we go through the book of Revelation, you're going to see that this is not true. But it certainly obscures the truth when you take this position. He claimed that the death of the two witnesses would be literally fulfilled during that future 3.5-year period. And that chapter 11 was dealing with the literal reconstruction of the Jerusalem church. Any of you heard these notions? Any of the books you read here lately or see on TV? Ribera taught that the time of the Antichrist prophesied in chapters 12 to 22 would take place during that literal 3.5 years, and the starting date was hidden from view. He said the prophet could only see the tops of the mountains. You know, he was standing here and he could see this peak, but then there was a big valley. And then there was another peak. So he could see this peak and he could see that peak, but he didn't know what was in the valley. And we don't know how big that valley is. We don't know how long it's going to take to cross that valley. In Ribera's opinion, the woman in chapter 12 is the church travailing just prior to the appearing of Antichrist. And the persecution of the church is interpreted as being when Christians are compelled to flee for safety during Antichrist's reign. It's partly true, as we'll see when we get to chapter 12. The notion is right. The timing is wrong. These are photographs of the documents. The one up in the top there, upper left, that's Ribera's document. Bellarmine took Ribera's information and he sort of embellished it a little bit. Didn't change it much, except that he undermined the day for a year understanding of prophecy, so that he could work in this 3.5 literal years instead of it being 1,260 years. Alcazar's over there on the lower right. He's the one that wrote Preterism. And here's a chart. Can you see that? As I was working this up, I thought, you know, this kind of follows like a genealogy. You know, you start with Ribera and you see who he passed it down to, and then you can see who took it up next. You know, you can follow this genealogy. I don't know if any of you are interested in genealogy, you know, but if you can track from one to the next, to the next, to the next, then and there's no gaps, we know exactly how it went. Now, I'm trying to read this. I can't read on my screen. I can't read up there. Put my glasses on. Okay, what does it say? Francisco Ribera. He came up with these notions. Cardinal Bellarmine was the next guy. He took the notions and added in the date for the year principle. He threw that away. Then it went along for 200 years, but it didn't do anything. Then this guy, Manuel de la Cunza, he picked up on the notion. His document that he wrote is 2 volumes, 1,200 pages. He had quite a bit to say about the Antichrist. But all he was doing was advancing Ribera's notions. When he wrote his book, which was published in 1791, he wrote it under a pseudonym. He claimed to be the Rabbi one Josephat ben Ezra. He was the one that first began to promote the notion of Israel as a nation being reestablished. And in his document, it was translated into 3 languages, Spanish, French, and English, which was all the common languages of the day, so it could be read by anybody that could read. He sent it around to churches and to universities. He didn't make any money doing it. He didn't want to make any money doing it. All he was trying to do was promote his notions. Well, it ended up in a cathedral at Canterbury, in the library, where Samuel Rocky Maitland discovered it in the 1800s, 1830s. He knew the man Edward Irving. Edward Irving was trying to get some studies going on the prophecies. And he was really intently holding in prophecy study groups. And Maitland knew that he was working to bring this. So he said, oh, here, look, I've got this book that I found in the library. He handed the book off to Irving. So it didn't come directly from Lacunza to Irving. It had to go through Maitland first. So it went through Maitland. Irving got the book. He read it. He was thrilled with what he read. He handed it off to John Nelson Darby. John Nelson Darby was a student of Irving's. Irving took Margaret MacDonald's notion. She had the notion, the vision, of a secret rapture. She said that all these things are not going to bother the church, not going to bother the people of God, because God's people are going to be secretly whisked away before the Antichrist comes and does anything. So that's where the secret rapture notion came from. She taught that to John Nelson Darby. She preached that for